Hi, and welcome to Sleepy History. If you're listening to this at night, I hope it helps you unwind. Please like and subscribe. It means so much to me. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it? It's so nice to think that wherever we are, we're sharing this moment together. Tonight's story begins not with kings or castles, but with a family. A simple one. A mother, a father, and 2 children. They live in a small cottage nestled at the edge of a quiet medieval village, where the forest begins and the road bends toward fields. It is early. Dawn hasn't broken yet. The sky outside is still heavy with stars, and the frost clings to every blade of grass and thatched roof like a breath held too long. Inside the cottage, the fire has burned down to faint coals. A single candle glows in the center of the room, its light flickering on the rough wooden beams above. The cottage is small, just one room, with walls of wattle and daub, and a roof that creaks in the wind. There are no rooms to separate the family. They sleep together on a straw mattress covered in woolen blankets, their bodies curled close for warmth. The father is already stirring. He sits up slowly, rubbing sleep from his eyes, careful not to wake the others. He moves across the cold floor, pulling on his tunic and wrapping a thick cloak over his shoulders. The door creaks softly as he opens it, letting in a whisper of freezing air. He steps outside into the quiet of the morning, where the world is still asleep. His boots crunch on the frozen path as he heads to the small shed where the family's tools are kept. Inside, the mother wakes next. She stokes the hearth, blowing gently into the embers until the fire catches. The light grows slowly, casting long shadows across the stone floor. She places a pot over the flame and adds water, then a few handfuls of barley and chopped leek. The scent begins to rise, warm and earthy. The children stir beneath the blankets. The oldest, a boy of about 8, stretches and yawns. His little sister, not more than 5, blinks at the ceiling, then curls tighter under the blanket, chasing one last dream before the day begins. Their world is small but filled with quiet purpose. On the shelf above the hearth, a clay cup holds a bundle of dried herbs. Thyme, mint, a sprig of lavender. A comb carved from bone rests beside it. A pair of wooden shoes, small and worn, sit near the door. Everything in the cottage has its place. Everything is used, mended, shared. The family eats together on low stools by the fire. The porridge is simple, but warm. The children eat slowly, still waking. The father returns with kindling and sits beside them, his face red from the cold. The mother hands him a mug of warm broth, and they share a quiet moment before the tasks of the day take hold. The village is beginning to stir now. A distant bell chimes from the church tower. Smoke rises from other chimneys. Chickens begin to cluck. A cart rolls slowly past on the frosted road, its wheels creaking under the weight of hay. The family finishes their meal. The boy helps his father gather tools. Today, they will walk to the fields together. The little girl helps her mother sweep the floor and fetch water from the well. Their lives are shaped by habit, by season, by the rhythm of light and dark. And in this quiet beginning, there is something soft, something still, the kind of peace that comes not from ease, but from closeness, from being together, from knowing that however small their world might seem, they are not alone within it. The morning light filtered softly through the cracks in the shuttered windows, casting faint golden stripes along the walls. Outside, the mist still clung to the grass, and the thatch above the cottage steamed gently as the sun warmed the frost. The village was awake now, but it was not loud. Just the slow creak of wheels, the cluck of hens, the distant rhythm of a mallet against wood. Inside, the family of four moved with quiet purpose. The father and son set out first, their boots leaving dark prints in the wet soil. The boy carried a small sack of grain, his arms wrapped tightly around it. His father held a wooden hoe and a short scythe tied with twine. They didn't speak much on the path. The cold made the air sharp, and the silence of morning was something they both liked. They walked past the church, its bell already rung for the day, and followed the curve of the field where the Lord's land met their own small garden plot. The land was tired. It had given what it could in the last season, and now it waited for spring. But there was always work to do, tools to mend, fences to check. The path that led between furrows needed clearing of stones that had crept up with the frost. The father showed the boy how to test the ground, where the soil would thaw first, where the roots might hold. His words were few, but steady. The boy listened, nodding, hands in his sleeves. Back at the cottage, the mother and daughter worked in smaller circles. They fed the chickens, scattering seed and sweeping out the coop with a brush of bundled twigs. The little girl wore a long tunic that dragged behind her and a scarf tied over her ears. She picked up the eggs one by one, cradling them in her apron like precious stones. Her mother watched, smiling quietly. Inside, they started to prepare the noon meal. A flatbread was shaped and set near the fire to bake slowly on a warm stone. A small wheel of cheese was unwrapped from a cloth, its rind firm and sharp-smelling. A few wrinkled apples were sliced thin. These were winter things, kept through cold and care, saved for days when the pantry felt empty. There was no waste in the family's home. Ash from the hearth was used to scrub the floor. Rainwater was caught in a wooden barrel outside. Bones from last week's broth were simmered again, softened into a thin soup. Everything had a second use, sometimes a third. When the father and son returned, cheeks pink from cold, they brought stories with them. Not tales, just small things. A bird's nest found near the hedge, a broken cartwheel spotted near the road, a track in the mud, maybe fox, maybe dog, the kind of details that made the world feel full. They ate together, cross-legged on the ground around a low board. The girl's hands were sticky with apple juice. The boy tore bread and handed it around. The father chewed slowly. The mother rested her hand on the boy's shoulder for just a moment, brushing off a crumb, but staying there. After the meal, the daughter napped in a pile of wool by the hearth. The mother mended a sleeve, thread pulled from an old tunic. The boy helped his father repair a handle that had split on the scythe, learning how the grain of wood tells its own story, when to cut with it, when to work around it. The light changed slowly. Afternoon came, soft and grey. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the wind. No one asked for more than what the day gave. And in that rhythm, the passing of time, the shared weight of tasks, the nearness of breath and hand, life unfolded. Not easy, not grand, but whole. A family of four together. As the day leaned into afternoon, the shadows along the cottage walls grew longer. The sun, pale and distant, cast a silvery sheen over the fields and rooftops. The wind stirred gently, curling through the narrow lane that wound past the church and toward the small village green. It was here, under the slant of a bare tree and near the worn steps of the chapel, that trade and talk often gathered. The father walked there now, with his son trailing quietly behind. In his hand, he carried a small cloth bundle. Inside were a few things to trade, a wedge of dried cheese wrapped in waxed cloth, a small wooden whistle carved by his own hand, and a pair of worn leather laces saved from an old pair of boots. Not much, but perhaps enough to exchange for a pinch of salt, or a length of thread, or even a strip of smoked fish if luck was kind. At the green, a few others had gathered. A neighbour selling eggs, the miller's boy with 2 loaves of dense rye bread, an old woman with herbs tied in bunches, yarrow, fennel, and mint. No loud bargaining filled the air, only the low murmur of voices shaped by need and modest hope. The father bartered carefully. 1 piece of cheese for a half-pouch of salt, the whistle for a cloth scrap to mend the girl's hem. The laces, frayed and softened with age, he offered to the shepherd in return for a small cup of sheep's milk to be taken home and warmed. The boy watched, silent but wide-eyed. He saw how each item, no matter how small, held weight. Coin was rare in their lives. A few copper pieces might pass through their hands in a year, perhaps from a task done for the steward, or from the sale of a basket woven well. They were not coins that stayed long. They went toward taxes, toward candles, toward the rare fee required by the Lord's men. And yet, the family felt no shame in their lack. They had what they needed, most days. And when they did not, they shared with those who had slightly more. That was how the village lived, by a quiet agreement that no one voiced, but all understood. The son asked if he could hold the pouch of salt. His father nodded and placed it in his hands. It was light, but the boy carried it with great care, as though it might slip away if held too loosely. Back at the cottage, the mother was washing cloth in a wooden tub. The water had been warmed over the fire, and steam curled in the air as she wrung the fabric between her hands. The little girl sat beside her, playing with a wooden doll carved from a spoon handle, dressing it in scraps of cloth and whispering songs it could sleep to. When the father and son returned, the salt was added to the small store in the corner, wrapped carefully to stay dry. The cloth went into the basket of mending. The milk was set on the hearthstone to warm. And the family gathered once more, not to feast, but to rest. The fire cracked. The girl fell asleep in her mother's lap, her hand still holding the doll. The boy ran his fingers over the empty pouch that had once held salt, learning in his own quiet way what value meant. And in that dimming hour, with the wind soft outside and the hearth glowing within, the family sat close. They had no treasure, no wealth to count, but they had each other. They had warmth. They had enough. And that, in their small world, was everything. The smell of baking bread drifted slowly through the cottage, curling into the air like a memory. It came from the hearth, where a small flat round lay on a hot stone near the coals, its crust beginning to brown, its edges rising just slightly as the heat worked its way through the dough. The mother sat beside it, her sleeves rolled up, her hands dusted with flour. A bowl nearby held the remnants of kneading, a few streaks of dough, a bit of water, a sprinkle of salt. She worked quietly, turning the bread with a flat wooden paddle, watching the way the firelight caught the crust and made it glow. The father returned from gathering wood, his cloak damp with snowmelt. He brought with him a bundle of kindling and a few thicker branches, bound together with twine. His boots were muddy, his fingers red from cold. He stepped inside and nodded softly, setting the bundle near the door, then warming his hands near the hearth. The children had been playing outside earlier, but now they sat close to the warmth, wrapped in woolen shawls. The boy had a bit of charcoal and was sketching figures onto a piece of bark, the shape of a sheep, a sun, perhaps a tree. The girl clutched a piece of cloth, folding it and unfolding it in her lap like a blanket for her doll. The bread was ready. The mother lifted it gently, breaking it into 4 pieces, each one still steaming at the center. She handed them out slowly, first to the father, then the children, then herself. No butter, no honey, just bread, but warm and enough. They ate in near silence, not because they were sad, but because this was a moment that needed little saying. The children chewed slowly, their eyes fixed on the fire. The father stretched his legs and leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes for just a moment. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall. It landed softly on the thatched roof, on the cart beside the cottage, on the bare branches of the tree that bent slightly toward the path. The world was being wrapped in stillness, layer by layer. After their meal, the mother reached for a spindle of wool. She spun as the fire crackled, the fibre slipping through her fingers in a slow rhythm that matched the pulse of the evening. The boy handed her the drawing he'd made, and she smiled as she took it, tucking it into the shelf above the hearth. The father began to mend a harness strap, his hands steady, his brow furrowed in focus. The leather was worn but still strong, and he worked with care, sewing it closed with a needle made from bone. The girl laid her head in her mother's lap and listened to the spindle hum. There were no plans for tomorrow, no schedules, just what the weather allowed. If the sun returned, the father and son would walk to the clearing to gather more wood. If it snowed heavier, they would stay close, repairing what needed fixing, warming what needed to dry. And always, the fire would be there, the flame, small but faithful, that held back the cold. The bread, plain but filling, that gave strength. The hands, worn but gentle, that shaped and shared and soothed. And the quiet, soft, slow, steady, that wrapped around the family like a second blanket. In that stillness, beneath the flicker of light and the drift of snow, they rested. Together. The evening settled in like a thick wool cloak, slow and quiet. The light outside had dimmed to a soft blue, the snow still falling in thin, slanting lines. It gathered on the windowsill, nestled in the corners of the roof, and blurred the horizon beyond the trees. Inside the cottage, the hearth was the heart of the world. The fire burned low but steady, its light casting a warm, golden glow across the floor. Shadows stretched gently along the walls, moving with the flicker of the flame. The cottage smelled of smoke and wool, of baked bread and worn leather. Everything felt close, familiar, safe. The mother sat with her legs tucked beneath her, a bundle of mending in her lap. One of her husband's tunics had torn at the elbow, and she worked the needle through it with slow, practiced motions. Her fingers knew the fabric well. Each stitch was an act of care, of habit, of time woven into cloth. The daughter was beside her, threading buttons into a length of string. Her eyes followed her mother's hands with fascination, and now and then she would hold up her work proudly. A necklace of buttons, mismatched and lovely in its own way. The father polished a wooden bowl with a cloth, oiling the grain until it gleamed. The boy had gone quiet, his back resting against the warm stones near the fire, a wooden toy in his lap, a figure carved to look like a horse, its mane painted with ash and water. No one hurried. The night offered no reason to. This was a time of slow things. A song hummed low, not sung fully, just a breath of melody to accompany the needle's path. The kind of song sung by grandmothers, remembered without remembering how. It filled the space between the crackle of the fire and the gentle sighs of the wind against the door. The snow outside muffled the world. The village beyond the cottage walls had grown still. No footsteps passed along the road. No cartwheels turned. Even the chickens had tucked themselves into straw-filled corners, their feathers ruffled in sleep. The father finished polishing the bowl and placed it beside the others. He looked over at his son and gave a slow nod. The boy smiled, quietly pleased. The mother folded the mended tunic and set it near the door, ready for the morning. The daughter yawned and leaned against her. The button string fell into her lap. Later, they would sleep, all four of them under the same blanket, the fire banked carefully, the shutters fastened against the wind. The straw mattress would creak. The roof would murmur in the cold. But there would be warmth, held in the breath of bodies close together, in the wool pulled up to chins, in the glow that lingered on closed eyelids. For now, they simply sat. The hearthlight danced on the old wooden beams. The cat curled tighter near the door. A bit of wax dripped from a candle. The threads in the tunic shimmered faintly with oil and wear. And the family, bound not by coin or name or title, but by time, by care, by the hush of the firelight, breathed together in peace. The morning was brighter than usual. Thin sun streamed through the shutter slats, casting soft lines across the floor. The snow from the day before had hardened into a crust, glittering where the light touched it. Inside the cottage, the family stirred with a sense of mild urgency. Not panic, but awareness. Word had come the night before, passed from neighbour to neighbour, low and quick. The lord of the manor would be passing through today. It was a rare thing. Not a visit, not to the cottage, but a ride through the village on his way to the church or the hunt. Still, the path curved directly in front of their home, and it was expected that the villagers should appear tidy, respectful, observant. The mother rose early and swept the floor with a bundled broom. She straightened the bench near the hearth, dusted the shelf where the cups sat. Her hair was tied back with a faded ribbon, her sleeves rolled neat. The children were dressed in their best, tunics with the least wear, boots stuffed with dry straw for warmth. The father, too, washed before the basin. He combed his hair with wooden fingers and fastened his belt carefully. His cloak was worn, the edges frayed, but he pulled it straight over his shoulders and stood a little taller than usual. Outside, the village buzzed softly. Doors opened. Faces appeared in windows. Paths were swept. Animals shooed away. The road was cleared of snow as best as could be done. No one expected a conversation, just to be seen, to be still, to show the face of labour done without complaint. And then a horn sounded, low and clear, a single note that drifted across the rooftops like mist. The children pressed their faces to the window. The mother stepped outside, standing just past the door, her shawl pulled tight. The father and son stood at the edge of the lane, heads lowered slightly, hands resting at their sides. The Lord's procession came into view slowly. First the horses, their coats shining, their hooves crunching softly over the snow-packed road. Then the riders, cloaked in fur and colour, speaking to one another in low voices. And at the centre, a man taller than the rest, his cloak lined with dark velvet, his gloves of fine leather, his hair covered by a hood of heavy wool. He did not stop. He did not speak. But as he passed the cottage, he turned his head, just slightly. His eyes met the father's for half a moment. He nodded. That was all. And then he was gone. The children watched until the last of the horses had passed. The daughter clapped her hands once, softly, without realizing. The mother smiled faintly, and the father exhaled, slow and long, before returning inside. The cottage did not change. There was no gift, no sudden fortune. The bread was still coarse. The fire still needed stoking. But for a brief moment, they had been part of something beyond the fields and snow. They had stood with the village, been seen. Later, the son asked if the Lord had noticed the broom his mother had leaned by the door. She only smiled. Not everything needed an answer. And as the day wore on and the sun passed slowly across the sky, the rhythm of life resumed. Chores returned. Bread was baked. Wood was split. But the quiet thrill of the morning lingered, soft and thin, like mist caught in the eaves. The air inside the cottage had grown heavier, not from smoke or soot, but from the hush that illness brings. It started with a cough, low and harmless at first. The little girl had rubbed her eyes more than usual, turned her head toward her mother's shawl, and rested there without words. A day later, her forehead grew warm. Her voice faded to a whisper. The family knew this rhythm too. They had no physician, no healer who came at the call of coin, but the village had its knowledge. The old women who spoke in herbs, the prayers whispered into broth, the sense of how illness moves through a home, slowly at first, then with steadier breath. The mother boiled water with thyme and chamomile, placing the pot beside the bed so the steam would rise near the girl's head. She dipped cloth in cool water, wrung it, and pressed it to the child's brow. The father brought fresh straw to soften the mattress. The boy sat nearby, not quite knowing how to help, but staying close. The little girl slept most of the day. When she woke, her voice was soft and unsure. Her hands clutched at the blanket. The fire was kept high, even though the woodpile grew low. The mother barely left the cottage. The father took on more, with the boy beside him, feeding chickens, fetching water, patching the roof where the snow had melted and leaked. Each hour felt stretched, each breath measured. And yet, the family did not panic. There was no loud fear, only quiet care, shared glances, small prayers spoken without ceremony. In the evenings, the father read aloud from a thin book of saints' tales, his voice calm, the candlelight flickering gently on the girl's cheeks. One night, the wind howled hard outside. The shutters trembled, the trees groaned, the fire flared once, then settled. The girl cried softly in her sleep, caught in dreams, and her mother leaned close, humming until the restlessness passed. Her hand brushed her daughter's forehead again, a little cooler perhaps, just slightly. And so they waited with wool warmed by fire, waited with soup stirred by hand, waited with the soft weight of love pressing gently against the unknown. Then, one morning, the girl opened her eyes fully. She sat up. She asked for bread. The change was small but deep. Relief did not arrive in cheers, only in breath released, shoulders lowered, the fire banked more gently. The boy brought her the doll she'd dropped days ago. The father went out to gather kindling with a lighter step. The next evening, she stood beside the hearth again, still tired, but upright. She leaned against her mother's leg as the spindle turned and the needle moved through cloth. And the cottage, for all its quiet, held something new, a sense of having passed through the dark. Not untouched, but together, steadier. In that warm, low light, with snow melting outside and life slowly returning to its small, careful rhythms, the family sat once more, not without memory, but with peace. The path to the mill was longer than it seemed. It wound through fields now muddy from melting snow, past the churchyard and a row of elder trees still bare from winter. The sky above was soft and pale, streaked with fine clouds, and the breeze carried the distant scent of wet grain and running water. The father and son walked together, each carrying a sack of barley on their shoulders. Not much, just enough to make flour for a week or two. Coarse brown flour, good for bread and thickening soups. It was a journey made often and always with quiet steps. The sacks shifted with each motion, pressing into shoulders already worn from winter's weight. The mill stood near the stream, nestled between the trees where the current never fully froze. Its great wooden wheel turned slowly, creaking with rhythm, water sliding across its paddles with a steady rush. The building itself was made of stone, low-roofed and moss-covered, with smoke curling faintly from the chimney. Inside, the air was filled with the scent of grain and wood smoke. Dust hung like mist in the morning light, caught in beams that filtered through cracks in the shutters. The miller greeted them with a nod, his apron dusted white, his sleeves rolled up. He was a quiet man, with thick arms and a voice like worn leather. No need for much talk. The barley was weighed, poured, sifted. Coins changed hands, small ones tucked in cloth, and the sacks were returned filled with meal, warm from the grindstone. While they waited, the boy wandered near the wheel, watching its slow turn. He placed his hand against the beam where it creaked, feeling the tremble of power through the wood. His father joined him, and for a moment they stood in silence together, listening to the sound of the millstone turning. Soft, steady, ancient. The boy asked how it worked, and the father explained as best he could. Water turned the wheel turned the stone ground the grain, a dance of weight and time, of patience and force, like so many things in their world. When the sacks were ready, they hoisted them once more and made their way home. The road back felt shorter. The sky had warmed, and birds now flitted between the trees. The snow was almost gone, replaced by muddy patches and the first hints of green beneath the brown. At the cottage, the mother met them at the door. She helped ease the sacks to the floor, her hands already dusted with flour. The girl sat on a stool by the fire, humming softly to herself, her cheeks pink again, her voice stronger. The mill's work would become bread. That bread would become meals, and those meals would carry them through another week, another season. Later that afternoon, the mother began to knead a new batch of dough. The girl helped press it flat with her palms. The boy carved a new wooden scoop for the flour. The father repaired the storage bin, its hinges creaking from years of use. And so, the rhythm continued. From seed to sack, from wheel to loaf, from quiet work to shared table. All of it held within the lives of 4 people, in one cottage, beneath the slow-moving sky. Once every fortnight, the village green filled with colour. It was not grand. There were no trumpets, no stalls heavy with gold. But to the family of 4, market day was a quiet kind of holiday. A day when the world seemed just a little larger, and the air filled with the scent of spice and straw, and strangers passed through with stories told in different accents. The morning began early. The mother packed their basket with what they had to offer, 2 skeins of spun wool, a bundle of dried nettles, and a small pot of honey saved from last autumn's hive. The father loaded a pair of wooden spoons he had carved, and a rope of onions, still strong despite the frost. The children clutched a few coins, earned from small errands, saved in a cloth pouch tied with string. The path to the green was lively. Villagers walked with baskets and carts. Chickens clucked in wicker cages. A goat bleated from behind a hedgerow. The road was muddy from snowmelt, but spirits were high. The sun, though pale, shone freely, and the trees whispered with the promise of spring. At the market, everything felt alive. A potter displayed clay cups and plates. their surfaces glazed with deep blue and soft brown. A young boy juggled apples near the fountain, and a woman sold ribbons dyed with beetroot and walnut shell. The baker's wife handed out flat cakes, sweetened with honey and dusted with crushed almonds. The smell alone was enough to draw a crowd. The family moved slowly through it all, taking it in. The mother traded her wool for a length of coarse linen and a small jar of goose fat. The father swapped one spoon for a handful of dried fish and the other for a leather strap, worn but whole. The daughter watched a man selling clay beads and whispered to her mother. A coin changed hands. A smile followed. The boy stood for some time near the storyteller, an old man with a white beard sitting on a stool beneath a tree, speaking softly to a half circle of listeners. His voice rose and fell like wind over hills. The boy leaned closer. The story was about a knight who slept beneath a tree for 100 years and woke with moss in his beard. Later, they ate their meal near the edge of the green. Bread, cheese, and a bit of dried apple shared on a cloth under the wide sky. The children laughed. The parents sat close. Their legs were tired, but the mood was light. This was not wealth, but it was something else. Community, colour, a sense of motion. They returned home with fewer goods, but lighter hearts. The cottage welcomed them with its usual silence. The fire was built again, the kettle hung. The new cloth was folded and set near the spindle. The beads were placed on the daughter's doll. The son told the story of the mossy knight to the cat, who listened with great seriousness. And as evening came, the sounds of market day faded from memory, replaced once more by the crackle of fire, the creak of the roof, the quiet rhythm of home. But for a little while, they had stepped beyond their daily circle. They had touched the edges of the world and brought back warmth in their hands. It began with a drizzle. Light and thin, it tapped softly on the thatch and pooled quietly along the edge of the road. No one minded it, not at first. It was the kind of rain they knew well, gentle and passing, a grey curtain that drifted through the village and moved on. But this rain stayed. By the second day, the paths had turned to mud. Chickens huddled beneath the cart, and the firewood stack darkened with damp. The sound of raindrops became constant, on the roof, on the windowsill, in the puddles outside the door. It crept into every corner, soft and patient. Inside the cottage, the family of 4 adjusted. The fire was kept alive with careful hands. The father split wood in smaller pieces so it would dry quicker, his sleeves soaked, his boots heavy with water. The mother hung cloaks near the hearth, shaking out the moisture each morning. The children played indoors now, inventing games with pebbles and spoons, whispering stories to each other as the rain whispered back. The roof began to drip in one corner. A small bowl was placed beneath it, catching each drop with a soft plink. It filled slowly, emptied, filled again. No one complained. It was just another sound in the symphony of the storm. Meals were simple and warm. Porridge with bits of dried apple, broth thickened with root vegetables, bread toasted near the fire until it cracked and steamed. The cottage smelled of smoke and damp wool, of earth and flame. The walls felt closer in the rain, the air heavier but not unpleasant. They passed the hours in slow tasks. The mother spun wool, her fingers moving steadily even when the wind pushed against the shutters. The daughter played nearby, dressing her doll in scraps of cloth and singing softly. The father mended a broken rake handle. The boy practiced his letters on a bit of bark, copying words his mother had shown him long ago. At night, the rain did not stop. It fell like a blanket, wrapping the world outside in hush. The fire hissed when it was fed. The shutters rattled gently. The family slept close, the blankets tucked high, their breaths warm in the chill air. Dreams came quietly, shaped by the soft rhythm of the storm. On the 5th day, the stream nearby overflowed. The road became a ribbon of water. The garden was soaked through, its beds drowned. The father stood at the door, watching the flow, calculating where to dig a trench. The mother stood beside him, her hand on the door frame, her expression calm. They had seen worse. The children played in silence that day, not afraid, but subdued, as though the sky's heaviness had touched them too. The boy watched water run down the window in thin lines, tracing paths with his finger. The girl listened to the fire, counting each snap as if it were a beat. Eventually, the rain lessened, not stopped, but softened. The wind grew still. A bird chirped, the first in days. The road remained muddy, the garden soaked, but the air felt lighter. The bowl under the drip remained empty for nearly an hour. That evening, the family sat closer than usual, not to speak, not to plan, but simply to be still together, to let the silence hold them. The fire burned bright, the shutters stayed closed. The storm had passed, or nearly so, and in its wake they found themselves the same, but also, somehow, steadier, like stones worn smooth by rain, like wood that bends but does not break. Spring had truly arrived. The snow was gone. The earth softened beneath bare feet, and the fields shimmered with new green shoots. The air smelled of damp soil and sun-warmed hay. It was the season of beginnings again. And in the village, it meant one special thing: feast day. The feast was not lavish, but it was joyful. It was held in honor of Saint Edric, the protector of flocks and planting hands. The chapel bell rang twice at sunrise, long and low, calling the villagers not to worship, but to gather. The family of 4 prepared early. The mother packed bread still warm from the hearth, wrapped in cloth and tied with string. The father carried a crock of curds and herbs, made the day before. The boy brought a bundle of kindling for the shared fire. The little girl held tight to a single hen's egg, her quiet gift for the table. The village green came alive with motion. Long tables of mismatched planks were carried out and set beneath the blooming tree at the centre of the square. A garland of woven flowers hung from its branches. People brought what they could: flat cakes and beans, jugs of small beer, honeycomb in wax, slices of dried meat wrapped in cloth. The family laid their offerings on the table. They didn't speak of what they lacked. No one did. All things were welcome. Children ran between the tables, their laughter light and tangled with the bird song. The boy and girl joined them soon after, their hands still sticky from breakfast, their feet kicking up soft clouds of dust. The father helped stack firewood at the centre, where a cooking fire would be lit. He stayed close to the flame, feeding it gently as it caught and grew. The mother joined the other women weaving flower crowns from ivy and primrose, passing the skill along to daughters and nieces and small boys eager to try. When the sun stood high, the feast began, not with speeches, just a shared nod. A prayer said softly, and then the slow breaking of bread. Each family took what they needed, a piece of this, a spoonful of that. The curds were creamy, the flatbread warm, the eggs rich and yellow. The taste of spring was on every bite, the kind of flavour that only follows hunger and work. The family of 4 sat together beneath the tree, eating from wooden bowls, their backs warmed by the sun. The girl wore her flower crown tilted to one side, petals brushing her cheek. The boy traded a slice of bread for a pear, and then split it with his sister. The feast lasted all afternoon. There was music, played on a reed flute and a drum made from goatskin. No dancing, not in this small village. But feet tapped, fingers swayed, heads nodded in time, a kind of quiet celebration that stayed close to the earth. As the sun dipped low, the tables were cleared, the fire fed one last time, and the children, tired from running, leaned into their parents' sides. The walk home was slow and golden. The path glowed with soft dust. The birds sang their final songs. The breeze was cool but kind. The family said little, full from food and light, and the simple joy of being among others. Back in the cottage, the fire was stirred again, and the flower crown was placed gently on the shelf above the hearth. The egg, untouched, had cracked slightly in the girl's hand during play, but she didn't cry. She simply set it beside her bowl, smiled, and curled up near the fire. That night, they slept deeper than usual. Not because of the food, but because of the warmth of being part of something larger than their own four walls. A table shared, a story told, a day spent under sun and sky, and the promise that tomorrow, and the day after, they would return to their quiet rhythm. Together, the days had grown longer. The sun now lingered over the hills until late in the evening, casting golden light across the fields, catching in the tall grass and warming the stones of the cottage wall. The family moved more slowly in the summer heat, not out of laziness, but from the fullness of days that stretched wide and unhurried. The mornings began early, not with cold, but with birdsong. Soft trills and whistles fluttered through the open shutter, waking the family with gentle rhythm. The children no longer needed cloaks. They padded across the wooden floor in their bare feet, already warm from the rising sun. The father rose first, stepping out to the well with a bucket, the water cool against his arms. The mother stirred a pot of porridge on the hearth, its surface swirling with wild berries picked the night before. The fields swayed with grain, not yet ripe, but heavy with promise. The father worked them alongside the boy, now older, his shoulders broader. They moved with steady purpose, weeding and shaping the furrows, watching for signs of pests. The boy asked questions now, about the sky, the earth, the way wheat bends before it breaks. The father answered, not as teacher, but as companion. The mother and daughter tended the garden behind the cottage. It was full now, onions, leeks, a few carrots twisted by the shape of the soil. The daughter carried a basket made from reeds, nearly as big as she was. She picked each vegetable with care, turning them over in her small hands before placing them inside. The mother smiled without words, showing her where to look, when to pull, and when to leave it be. The cottage itself opened to the season, shutters flung wide, door propped with a stone, a curtain tied back with string. The breeze brought in the scent of grass and flowers, and the sound of bees humming near the lavender that grew beside the path. The cat sprawled on the warm floor, belly to the sun, tail flicking lazily with every sigh of wind. Meals were lighter, simpler, fresh bread, a smear of soft cheese, cucumbers soaked in vinegar, a pinch of salt. The girl loved the berries best, blackcurrants, tart and deep, staining her fingertips. The boy carved a new spoon, its handle shaped like a bird. The father placed a fresh reed mat beneath the sleeping corner. The mother mended a torn hem and braided her daughter's hair with grass. They rested more in the afternoon. The heat slowed everything. The father sat on the threshold with his eyes half closed. The sun leaned against the wall, humming softly. The mother cooled her feet in a basin. The girl slept, curled like a cat in the shadow of the door. Evenings were their own kind of magic. The sun melted slowly, painting the sky in streaks of rose and amber. Swallows darted through the air. Smoke rose from nearby chimneys. The family sat outside, watching the light fade. The boy whittled. The girl picked flowers and tucked them behind her ear. The parents shared the last piece of bread and spoke little. And when darkness came, it was not sudden. It came like a blanket being drawn gently over the world. The fire in the hearth burned low, not for warmth, but for comfort. The shutters were closed again, the door barred. The children were tucked in close, the wool pulled up to their chins even in the warmth. And in that quiet summer night, beneath the stars beginning to blink into the sky, the family slept, held by the soft hush of fields, the sigh of trees, the peace of a season spent together. It began with a sound, a soft tap, then another, then a faint trickle near the hearth. Rain had returned, not the cold sheets of winter, but a summer storm, warm and sudden, with thick drops that struck the thatch like whispers at first, and then grew more insistent. The family looked up from their evening bread as the first drop fell into the bowl of flour near the wall. The father rose with a slow breath, took a cloth, and moved the bowl aside. He placed a small pot beneath the drip. The mother touched the ceiling beam with her fingertips. Damp. Software. The kind of damp that sinks deep when left too long. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind the scent of soaked earth and the glistening hush of leaves dripping into puddles. The sun warmed the wet ground, and mist clung to the grass like breath held in sleep. The roof needed mending. It was no surprise. The thatch was old. The reeds near the river had not been cut in 2 summers. The father gathered his tools with quiet focus. A wooden ladder, a bundle of twine, a worn knife. The boy helped, carrying what he could. He looked to the roof with worry, not fear, but the kind of careful concern learned from watching. They worked slowly, first pulling aside the damp thatch. Layer by layer, the reeds came free. Some were brittle, others dark with rot. The boy passed up fresh bundles gathered from a neighbour's store, traded the day before for a spoon and a patch of waxed cloth. The father set each bundle with care, laying them in a tight slope, fastening them with twine and wooden pegs. The sun was warm on their backs. The ladder creaked with each step. Bees floated near the lavender. The mother and daughter worked below, brushing the fallen reeds into bundles to use for kindling. The girl hummed, her voice soft and high. At midday, they stopped. The family sat in the shade of the cottage wall, drinking water from a shared cup. The bread was thin, the cheese nearly gone, but the rest itself was full. The boy leaned his head on his mother's shoulder. The girl tucked a reed behind her ear and giggled when it tickled. Then the work resumed. The father tied the last bundle into place, his fingers moving with slow precision. The boy followed his gestures with care. A knot here, a twist there, a press of the hand to test the slope. By late afternoon, the roof was whole again, tight and clean, with a fresh scent that mingled with sun-warmed earth. Inside the cottage, the damp patch near the hearth was gone. The pot was emptied, the cloth set out to dry. The fire crackled gently, and the walls no longer echoed with dripping. Peace had returned to the corners. That night, the family listened to the wind. It moved through the new thatch with a softer sound, like fingers brushing reeds in sleep. The roof held. The walls were dry. The girl reached for her doll. The boy traced the shapes of stars on the inside of the shutter, and the father sat for a moment longer near the fire, a hand resting on his knee. the other smoothing a wrinkle in his tunic. He did not speak, but his breath fell slow, steady, sure. The cottage was safe again, and in that safety, they drifted into sleep, the roof above them cradling each dream with quiet strength. The day had started like any other. The air was cool and damp from the night, the sky brushed with soft blue and streaks of pale cloud. A fire had been lit, breakfast stirred. The father sharpened a spade. The mother twisted thread onto her spindle. The children played beside the hearth, drawing shapes in a pile of spilled flour. Then came the knock. It was not loud, just a single, steady sound on the old wooden door. The family paused. Strangers were rare, and knocks rarer still. The father rose, brushing flour from his tunic, and opened the door with cautious calm. Outside stood a traveller. A man of middle years, wrapped in a dark cloak dusted with the road. His boots were worn, his face lined with sun and wind. He held no weapon, only a walking stick and a leather satchel. His voice, when he spoke, was low and respectful. "Only a drink," he said, "and perhaps a place by the fire." The father nodded once and stepped aside. Hospitality was not a luxury in their world. It was a shared duty, passed from door to door, from season to season. The traveller was offered a stool, and a bowl of water was placed in his hands. He drank slowly, gratefully. The children watched him with wide eyes. He smiled gently, said nothing more, and warmed his hands near the hearth. The mother passed him a piece of bread. He broke it in half, then again, and ate it slowly, chewing with reverence. The girl offered him a dried currant from her pocket. He took it like treasure. As the fire cracked, the traveller began to speak. Not of wars or riches, but of places he had seen. Quiet valleys where sheep grazed by starlight. Forests with trees so tall the sun barely touched the ground. Chapels where bells rang out across snow-covered hills. His voice wove pictures that settled into the room like dust on old books. The boy asked if he had ever seen the sea. The man nodded, described it in words as slow as waves, how it smelled of salt and wood and wind, how it moved even when still, how he once watched the moon rise over it like a coin from a deep well. The mother listened while she spun. The father cleaned the blade of his spade. The girl rested her head on her mother's lap and drifted close to sleep. The traveller asked for no coin, only warmth, only stillness. He sat with them until the shadows grew long and the fire began to fade. Then, with a bow of his head, he stood. The father handed him a piece of bread wrapped in cloth. The mother gave him a sprig of rosemary for his bag. The children waved from the threshold. He walked off into the dusk, and the family returned inside. The door was closed once more. The fire stirred. The children lay down beneath the wool blanket, their minds turning slowly over the images the traveller had left behind. That night, the boy dreamed of waves. The girl dreamed of a chapel bell echoing through snow. And the cottage, for all its simple quiet, felt just a little wider, a little deeper, as though for one brief afternoon, the world had come to visit and left behind a few gentle echoes. The leaves had begun to turn. First, just a hint, a single golden edge on the trees that lined the path near the well. Then more, day by day. Amber, russet, brown. The world softened again into quiet colours, as though the land itself were folding in for sleep. The family of four felt the change, not with dread, but with familiarity. Autumn was not a season of surprise. It was known, trusted, a time for gathering, mending, and slowing down. In the cottage, the hearth returned to its full glow. Wood, stacked high near the door, crackled with life. The cat claimed its place beside the fire again, curling into the shape of a comma, undisturbed. The mother moved more slowly as she worked, tying herbs to dry along the beams, organizing the pantry shelf. Jars of berries preserved in honey caught the light like tiny stained glass windows. The father sharpened tools with careful rhythm. Each stroke across the stone sang softly in the warm air. He patched the small cart, retied the shutter latch, checked the chicken coop for holes. The boy helped lift baskets of kindling. He practiced tying knots his father had shown him weeks earlier. The girl sat with her doll wrapped in linen and told it stories of what the leaves sounded like when they fell. Outside, the wind moved with a different voice now. It carried the dry rasp of leaves along the path and whispered through the hedges with a gentler hush. Smoke curled straight from chimneys into the wide sky. The fields had mostly been cleared, the earth left to rest beneath a soft blanket of straw and ash. Meals became heavier, richer. Stews with barley and wild roots, bread darker and thicker, full of cracked grains. Apples stewed with a pinch of spice, warm cups shared with 2 hands. Everything cooked slowly, patiently, as if time itself had become an ingredient. One evening, the family sat together watching the shadows deepen. The fire was low. The shutters were drawn. A candle flickered near the shelf. No one spoke. There was no need. The boy leaned his head on his father's arm. The girl reached for her mother's hand. Their breaths were soft, slow. The quiet of the cottage wrapped around them like wool. Outside, the last of the season's leaves slipped from the trees. They floated down without sound, joining the soft pile already covering the earth. The stars blinked through the high clouds. An owl called once from the woods. Then silence returned. The year was turning again. The family had known hardship, yes, illness, storm, hunger that waited just beyond the edge of the cupboard. But they had known light too, and laughter. A warm dish in cold hands. A song hummed low near the fire. A door opened to a stranger and closed behind a memory. And so they slept, curled together beneath the roof they had mended, beneath the stars they never saw but always trusted were there. One family, 4 hearts, beating quietly in time with the turning of the earth.